I'm Jonathan Dawson. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Civil War. We had a 30-year Civil War. So my father is a veterinary surgeon, so I had a lot of contact with farms. He was a vet working with farm animals. In many ways, a very peaceful childhood, but then the Civil War in Ireland started, and it became more dangerous, more frightening. And so, at the age of 17, I left to go to study in London, and studied French and politics. And then I did a second degree in international relations. I already knew that I love traveling and meeting other cultures, so I did international relations. In fact, I knew that I wanted to work in Africa. For some reason, I don't know why, I've always been fascinated by Africa.
Which countries or which?
Well, I just knew Africa. I just knew that I was fascinated by Africa. So I got a job in Ghana, in West Africa, working with the British Volunteer Programme. And so I went and lived in Africa and got a real exposure to a very different type of way of living, culture. And I really fell in love with African music and culture and really loved the experience. I then did an MPhil research, Master of Philosophy research, into the impact of structural adjustment, economic liberalisation on the indigenous manufacturing sector in Ghana. Then I got a job with Intermediate Technology Development Group. It's the organisation that Schumacher created, working with appropriate technology. So for a decade I travelled in various parts of Africa, living in Europe but travelling around Africa, and involved in designing and evaluating and managing projects to do with local economic development. Small enterprises. Then at a certain stage I decided to become involved in sustainability initiatives in Europe, and so I started travelling much less to Africa and became involved with eco-villages in Europe. I was living in a community called Findhorn in Scotland, and I became the coordinator of the European Eco-Village Network and the president of GEM, Global Eco-Village Network globally, and had the opportunity to see many experiments in community mobilisation. I also during that period realised that my gift is in education, that I just love working as a teacher. And so most recently, about 5 years ago, the post of Head of Economics at Schumacher College came up, and so I was very happy to accept their offer to take up that post, and that's where I am today.
And do you think of any moments you feel very happy or you feel very sad? What's the turning point in your life?
The discovery of Africa was a big...
When?
In 1980.
What's happened then?
I went to work as a volunteer in Zimbabwe, and I just discovered a whole new way of seeing and understanding the world that seemed to be much more organic and much closer to the soil than I had experienced in Europe. And I just found a lot of happiness in rural Africa. I love dancing, and the music is unbelievable. And then the other thing was becoming a father and having children, which was also a very high turning point. You want me to think of sad turning points as well?
Yeah.
I'm struggling. No, I've had a very lucky, happy life.
You mentioned you left the eco-village movement. Why? Could you tell us the reasons or the difficulties or the problems? Well, you just want to.
I left because the job came at Schumacher College, and so I left Windhoek. I also became persuaded that eco-villages are wonderful. They make the world a better place, and they have their limitations. So I think that during the 1960s and 70s, land was very cheap, and planning regulations were very relaxed, and so it was so easy to create alternative communities. But today this is no longer true. That in very few places is land cheap, and in very few places are planning regulations relaxed. And so I find that there continues to be a lot of very strong community-oriented activism, but it's translating less as people creating their own their new communities, eco-villages, and more in people returning to their home places to transition and becoming involved in retrofitting their own places. So I think that eco-villages are more like the training and research and demonstration centres for transition, but that the real changes I think that are happening are not in new build communities, but in places like this.
Do you think the ideal model comes from the rural Africa?
It could be, but the traditional communities in Africa, and I think probably here as well, but certainly in Africa, they're really suffering from two things. One is that their best resources are being integrated into the global economy, and so they're losing livelihood opportunities. They're losing. So, for example, in Senegal, I've done a lot of work in Senegal, and these are fishing communities where increasingly the fish are being taken not by the local fishermen, but by industrial European factory ships. And so the young people are having to leave because there's no work for them, because their best resources, their best land, their best waterways, their best fish are being taken for the global economy, on the one hand. And on the other, there's a very strong element of cultural imperialism, where the young people, where really the communities are being bombarded with advertising and television and images that make them believe that life elsewhere is better than their life. And the images are not representative. They're given images of people not having to work and everybody being happy and luxurious all the time, which is not the common experience of most people. And so it means that young people particularly lose cultural self-confidence and want to leave their own communities. And so between the economic pressures and the cultural pressures, it means that villages in Africa mostly are suffering.
So, from your point of view, what are the alternatives?
What are the alternatives? I mean, partly there's a growing number of networks of communities in Africa, Asia, Latin America that have understood the problem, and they're together, working together to combat, to try to build economic opportunities for their own people, to resist integration into the global economy, to celebrate their own culture. And I think that's the future. It's for people. So one of the things, for example, that Helena Norberg Hodge does, these things called reality tours, where she takes people from Ladakh to London, New York, and she shows them not only the good things, but also the really difficult things that they don't see, you don't get on television.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is to do with cultural self-confidence. And when the elders in Asia, Latin America, Africa, when the elders in the community have understood the nature of the economic, cultural pressures that are making life so difficult in their communities, they can collectively do something about it. So providing training as you're doing here for young people in growing food again, celebrating indigenous culture, celebrating your fantastic indigenous food, rather than being swamped with Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's. But it's very much about communities reclaiming again their economic and cultural coherence.
So, how do you think the future of the island or the future of Europe, how it relates to the future of the world, global?
I think that previously it may have been possible to have seen Europe as being the oppressor and the rest of the world being the oppressed. And increasingly I see a globalization of oppressors and oppressed. So on the one hand, some of the richest people in the world live in Hong Kong and Beijing and Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And increasingly, most people in Europe and certainly in Ireland really struggling and suffering. So it's been like there's been, rather than the rich countries and the poor countries, there is the rich international globalized class and the poor globalized class. And definitely in Ireland, and I worked this summer in Greece, and I've also worked in Spain, and like these are societies that are really crumbling, that people are sleeping in the streets, and there isn't a budget for medicine and schools, and so these are like increasingly austerity is hitting Europe very hard indeed. One of the things, last summer in Greece I taught a course on solidarity-based responses to austerity. So one of the things that's happening in Europe is we're seeing a whole range of solidarity-based responses, that people are seeing that they need to work together cooperatively to create a new model, a whole new system of societal organisation. So we're seeing a re-emergence of cooperatives and all sorts of networks based on generosity and solidarity that are emerging in response to the crisis. So it could be a moment, we could look back on this as being a moment of opportunity, where a growing number of the European population rejects the current model and begins to look at different ways of organisation.
So you think it's a kind of alternative to debt, right?
It's a response to debt, definitely. The opportunity generated by debt, definitely. I mean, not least because so much of the debt, like the economies of the industrialized world have grown over the last 30 years because of increasing debt. So debt has grown exponentially, and really the industrial economy has run out of steam, and it's being kept moving forward only because of massive injections of debt. Now, if you see debt as being claims on future wealth, so a lot of money being pumped into the system that are claims against future wealth, at a moment where our ecological systems are saying no more growth. So we're creating massive crises in terms of how this debt can be repaid in a context where growth is becoming increasingly difficult to imagine where it will come from. So how are these claims on future wealth to be paid off? It's hard to see, and there's a whole generation that will move into retirement soon, this demographic bulge of people born between 45 and 55, 60, where the state, the liability of the state and of corporations in terms of pension funds, how will this money be found to pay for pensions for those who are moving soon into retirement? It's not at all clear. So we're moving into a period of profound systemic crisis, and it seems to me the only plausible response is once again community solidarity.
Agreed. Thank you.